For decades now, Palm Springs has been the lure to stars, bringing the excitement of Hollywood to the Coachella Valley. But for some, when they arrive, they bring their problems with them. Such was the case for actor Tom Neal, who, as we see in this edition of Our Desert Past, was at the center of a high-profile murder that rocked Palm Springs in the 1960s.
You forgot to tell them our names. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Tom Neal.
He was never what you would call a big star, but starting in the 1930s, Tom Neal did appear in numerous B-grade Hollywood movies.
Why, someday.
Yeah, someday. If I don't get arthritis first. In the meantime, let's blow this trap.
His biggest role as a piano player in the 1945 film Detour. But by the early 1950s, Neal's career imploded. First, he got into a fistfight with another actor while they were working on the film The Great Jesse James Raid. Tone, the other actor, ended up in the hospital, and after that, Neal was blackballed from Hollywood. So he left Los Angeles and headed to the desert, settling in Palm Springs, where he started a gardening business. It was here where DeChristopher first met Neal.
I may have seen one of his movies, but didn't realize it, with those B movies he was in.
DeChristopher remembers Neal as a brash individual, outspoken, someone who liked to get his way. He recalls going with Neal to a beauty contest in Riverside, where Neal was a judge. Before the contest started, Neal was jovial, friendly, even pointing out which beauty he knew would win. But when she didn't win, Neal became unhinged.
After the gal he wanted to win didn't win, his whole personality changed. He was effing this and effing that, and it was, the people were, and I thought, boy, I can't wait to get back. And that was my last encounter with him. But it gave me an idea of the kind of guy he was.
Neal's behavior greatly troubled DeChristopher, and for good reason. Not long before that strange beauty contest, the actor Neal met a young woman in a restaurant that DeChristopher's parents ran in Palm Springs. Her name was Gail Yvette.
She had the whitest teeth you've ever seen.
And DeChristopher would know because he actually dated Gail, but they had since broken up.
She was a good person, and I really enjoyed her company. It was me that was not ready to get together.
Still, they remained cordial, and perhaps it was because of their friendship that Neal felt he needed to seek DeChristopher's permission to ask Gail out.
And he's dressed in a suit, and he says, I want to be a gentleman about this, but I would like to meet that young lady that knows you. And he says, well, we're not seeing each other anymore.
With that, Neal and Gail started dating. Eventually, Neal convinced her to marry him. In 1961, Gail Yvette became Mrs. Tom Neal. DeChristopher wondered why.
Could have been on a rebound or something, but I don't know. I don't know.
It would be 4 years before DeChristopher would hear from his friend Gail Neal again. Out of the blue, she called him in Los Angeles, where he had moved, frightened. She said she wanted to come visit him. DeChristopher agreed, and what Gail told DeChristopher haunts him to this day.
And she said, Al, I think he's going to kill me. I said, you're kidding? She says, no. I said, well, why don't you divorce him? She said, well, I got the paperwork going, but he's in Chicago. So I said, well, you ought to do something about it.
It would be the last time DeChristopher would see Gail alive. Several weeks later, he heard the terrible news on the radio.
I'm driving down here to the desert, and on the radio, her murder. They're talking about that she was killed.
Details and photos in the Desert Sun the next day were graphic. On the front page, a photo showing Gail's sheet-covered body on the couch inside their Palm Springs home. Detectives telling reporters that Gail had been shot with a .45 caliber automatic just behind her right ear. Neal confessed to friends, saying he had killed Gail and then turned himself in. During a high-profile trial, at that time the longest in desert history, a parade of Hollywood friends showed up to support Neal.
Mickey Rooney showed up, and a couple of other people, obviously the Hollywood type. Of course, Mickey Rooney had a life of his own that was questionable. But and even the guy that he had the fist fight with.
But the most powerful testimony came from Neal himself when he took the witness stand. He said that he was on one knee next to the couch when Gail admitted she'd been having sexual relations with several other men, that she was going to kill Neal. At that point, Neal claims, Gail produced a .45 caliber handgun. Neal says he yelled, "God, no, Gail!" And when he reached for the gun, it went off, firing the fatal shot into Gail's skull. DeChristopher never bought the story.
It struck me when they said that she was shot behind the right ear. And I said, wait a minute. She's a dominant left-handed person. So how are you going to shoot yourself behind the right ear if you're left-handed?
But then the shocker. Instead of first-degree murder verdict, the jury stunned the Indio courtroom, finding Neal guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The judge sentenced Neal to a maximum 15 years in state prison for the murder of a beautiful young girl with the whitest teeth you ever saw.
She was a good person. She really was. She did not deserve what he did to her.
After serving only 6 years in prison, Tom Neal was paroled in 1971. Instead of Palm Springs, he returned to Los Angeles, where he died a year later of heart failure. Tom Neal was 59 years old.